How's it going everyone, it's me Vivi and welcome back to another Ratchet and Clank related video. So on March 22nd, during the Game Developers Conference, GDC for short, which happened between March 19th and 23rd, where developers talk about hardware, software and their games pretty much, we had Brian Allgeier, creative director Ratchet and Clank, and future Saga and the rest of the game's writer TJ Fixman. Both talked about 15 years of history of our beloved series Ratchet and Clank. Now was this GDC conference filmed, live streamed or anything like that? No, that usually doesn't happen. Did they talk about the next game for those of you wondering? No, they didn't. Just think. The latest one was their fastest selling Ratchet and Clank game. We got 13 games so far. Just logically, think. Sales alone allowed Ratchet and Clank to have 13 games. With the reimagining being the fastest seller right now, what do you think? Of course we're gonna get another Ratchet and Clank game. It's just a matter of time. With that being said, an article was written by Giancarlo Valdez over on Rolling Stone. TJ Fixman also retweeted this article. The writer goes over the key points which were brought up by both Fixman and Allgeier during the conference. The title of the article, Adapt or Die, the 15-year history of Ratchet and Clank. The highlight of this article is, we always imagined the story as being Lethal Weapon meets Saturday morning cartoons. Now this was said by TJ Fixman. He brought this up. The words Saturday cartoon for some reason, they scare me. Now Fixman is not saying that Ratchet and Clank is primarily a Saturday morning cartoon, it's just a mix. If someone were to come up to you and tell you, oh, Ratchet and Clank isn't that the Saturday morning cartoon genre, what would you say about that? And why am I saying this? Well, the thing is, many called the Ratchet and Clank movie a Saturday morning cartoon. Many took it as a bad thing and as a disservice. You understand where I'm getting at? Anywho, the article starts like this. Few games are successful enough to justify a sequel, let alone 13 of them. For the past 15 years, the Sony-exclusive Ratchet and Clank franchise consistently defied the odds. So far, it's been on 3 generations of PlayStation consoles, has its own manga series, and even made it into theaters as a feature-length film in 2016. I 100% agree with what TJ Fixman said on stage. Over the years, he explained that the platformer genre has died a little. In terms of sales, it's hard to sell. Yes, now these days, it seems to be changing, right? Ratchet and Clank and Crash Bandicoot and Saint Trilogy being 2 great examples. For quite a number of years now, platformers haven't seen the light of day. I'm talking about years ago. It's slowly starting to change, right? As I said, as for Ratchet and Clank, it still succeeded at overcoming that obstacle. A bunch of developers fearing that their old genre would not be appealing anymore. As Fixman explained, Ratchet and Clank still has a place in our hearts. Some might say the same thing for Sly and Jack. Me being one of them. Why didn't those games reach this point? Well, Naughty Dog, they just lost interest. The team has changed and they're not like before. Druckmann explained that, hey, if we come up with an idea which has a lot of potential, we might make another Jack game. I'm not gonna get too much into that, alright? Sly Cooper. While the old team, Sucker Punch, who made the first 3 games, they tried something new afterwards, Infamous, and they stood by it. And in simple words, they just moved on. They feel like Sly is in right hands. Sanzaru. Don't forget, Sly got a game 8 years later, the 4th installment, and that highly impacted the sales. As I've said multiple times in the past, before Ratchet and Clank, Insomniac Games had thought of a girl with a stick. That was the name of the concept. The team didn't feel it, they scrapped it. Well, it got scrapped by Ted Price to be more precise. Eventually, Chief Creative Officer Brian Hastings came up with the concept of an alien who would travel from planet to planet. How'd they come up with the term Lombax? You have Ted Price to thank for that. He simply came up with the name. And little did they know that they would give birth to a 15 years long franchise. That is crazy, right? Next part of the article, which I find interesting. Ratchet and Clank came out in November 2002 to favorable reviews. However, it didn't really have a great story, and the characters didn't have much depth. Insomniac was so busy on the gameplay side of things that it didn't have time to flesh out this new universe. Alright, Fixman said it himself. Something I've always said, the PS2 had a heavier focus on gameplay. Not saying that the story was terrible, not at all. For the story part, for the first game at least, it's much better compared to the reimagining of course. The whole thing with Ratchet and Clank, their friendship. I would say that's the main complaint about the story of the reimagining. It just felt rushed and Clank was just tossed aside. Something which didn't happen in the first game. What I'm trying to say is, they were together in the original. They did hit a bump on the road, and that was part of their character development, but we did not really see that in the new game. What happened to Ratchet's personality? Why was he so kind in the reimagining, like a Boy Scout? Well, it brings me to this. Ratchet, Fixman said, was a bit of a selfish jerk, so for the sequel, the team rewrote him to be a kinder, more curious character and hired a new actor, James Arnold Taylor, to play him. From that first game, Insomniac learned an important lesson. Spend time developing your heroes and their relationships. If players don't care about them, they won't care about your world either. Okay. Ratchet was a jerk in the original. Yes, I completely understand, and so do you guys. But that added character development. Something their friendship was built upon. He was like, what, 15 years old? And has aged up to 25-ish? Is it so wrong to say that when he was younger, he was just more naive, selfish? Well, Clank was more of naive, the whole thing with Quark. Anyhow, the second part. It's ironic, really. Spend time developing your heroes and their relationships. I wonder how the reimagining handled that, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. TJ Fixman saying that tells me that this dude has potential, and he has shown his potential in the future saga. I absolutely adored his work. So why was the reimagining lacking? Well, it was a product of the movie. The game's script was heavily tied to the movie script. Heck, the game had scenes from the movie, self-explanatory. Ted Price, in one of the live streams, talked about creative freedom with the reimagining. They had to work with what was on the table. They were very restricted. If players don't care about these characters, if they don't get attached to them, if they don't care about them, they won't care about the game. Absolutely. Some are wanting a post into the Nexus game, and I'm part of that group. And why do they want that? Because they like that Ratchet and what he's become. If Fixman wrote the future saga, and a lot of people like that, so how do you explain him writing for the PS4 game? Like I said, creator freedom, and two, there was this whole situation where Fixman was the original writer of the movie. A long story short, the script was then given to Kevin Munro and Gary Swallow. I did make a video about the original script by Fixman. He did post like part of it in the past. I did cover it. Reading that alone already makes it feel like the movie could have been better, actually. But enough talking about the movie. When Going Commando came out, more weapons, more gadgets, right? The writer believed they added more of a RPG element. By writer, I'm talking about the writer of the article, not Fixman. The writer of the article explained how Insomniac Games tweaked the controls to make it feel like a modern third-person shooter. Now that genre was becoming popular, and with that, platformers slowly started to disappear. Right? What's with developers and this whole mature shooting style games? Anyways, a lot of these developers feared that their games wouldn't sell anymore because people were interested in realistic shooter games. Deadlocked was influenced by Halo and GTA apparently, and Fixman said Deadlocked deviated way too much, and I agree. They took the risk, but it worked out. I really enjoyed the gameplay. Another example of someone getting influenced by GTA, Naughty Dog. Jack 1 versus Jack 2. Guns everywhere. Ratchet was always a cartoon shooter, we know that. So for Ratchet and Clank, whatever you do, it's still a cartoon shooter. You can add more to it and make it better. Now if let's say you take away the guns, of course you're changing the whole concept. But what they've done with Ratchet and Clank is they simply added more, and people loved it. Allgeier compared the first and the next games by saying, part of the reason why the Ratchet and Clank series endured was because we dramatically evolved it. We transformed from being a platformer with shooting to shooter with platforming. Indeed, it did evolve, and no shame in that. It didn't change the feel of the games at all. It worked out brilliantly. And now the part where he said platformer with shooting, shooter with platforming, do you like that? He's saying there's more emphasis on shooting this time. I don't know, I always felt like Ratchet and Clank kept that platforming element. Comparing the next games to Ratchet and Clank 1, they just added more mechanics to the shooting aspect of things. But the platforming, it's still there. So I I can't seem to wrap my head around what he said. Perhaps it has to do with all of the new stuff they presented after the original game. But I like it. We transformed from being a platformer with shooting to a shooter with platforming. Later on, they explained that they wanted to bring the series' groove back. Exploration, combat, and relationships. Thus, the Future Saga happened. They hired TJ Fixman. The previous games were written by team members, pretty much. Now, the Future Saga, it turned out absolutely great. A Crack in Time being my favorite. The Future Saga brought something the series needed to tie in loose ends, as Fixman explained. The whole thing with the Lombaxes, Clank. I really like that. Allgeier said they thought that A Crack in Time was going to be their last one. That wasn't the case. They proceeded by experimenting. All for One and Full Frontal Assault. About that, I'm thinking they thought, hey, since Ratchet and Clank sells, why not try this and that? They could have taken a long break. They could have given us another fully fledged game after A Crack in Time. Why didn't they do that? I'm not too sure, to be honest with you. Maybe they thought taking a break would impact sales because it's a platformer cartoon shooter we're talking about, right? I mean, Into the Nexus was released in 2013. The reimagining released in 2016. That's 3 years of a break, we can say. Did it impact sales? Absolutely not. I mean, is 3 years too long of a break? Last thing, Brian Allgeier knew that fans, well, some of them didn't really like what they did after A Crack in Time. From his model to just the game mechanics altogether. Co-op and tower defense? Although Full Frontal Assault is fun online, it just doesn't feel like a true Ratchet and Clank game. So with that being said, guys, this is it for the video. I will leave the link of the article in the description below so you guys can read the whole thing. So yep, if you have questions, leave everything in the comment section below, and I've been Vivi, and thank you for watching.